Hello, my name is Ivana Givrin, and I welcome you to our discussion panel for the News Journal. I would like to thank our panelists, economist Ady Calero and attorney John Mudd, for being with us here today. We are here today to gather your opinions regarding the United States debt ceiling deal and what implications this might bring to Puerto Rico and its economy. As we all know, the Senate passed a bill last night to suspend the United States debt limit through January 2025 to avoid a first ever U.S. default, which would have caused a global economic crisis. The bill was sent to President Joe Biden to be signed into a law, which could happen as soon as today. This is not the first time the federal government has to raise or extend the debt ceiling to avert the nation's default. Then this takes us to our first question. Why do you think this year their political differences have been more present and caused so much controversy regarding the debt? Ms. Calero?
Well, it's a highly divided government. So it's Republicans in charge of the House of Representatives, and then the House, the White House is a Democratic president. So this is the result of a divided government. So the internal bickering continues, and I think it is a testament to really good negotiating skills on both sides, both of the President of the House of Representatives as well as of the President of the United States. So kudos to them. How long will that honeymoon last? It's still a question.
Mr. Mudd, go ahead.
Well, I agree with her completely. And now I'm only going to add that the most important part of this deal, ironically, is the political implication for the following reasons. Since in January 2025 this deal goes off and everything will have to be negotiated anew, the politicians will say, you have to vote for me, or us, or the party, so we will be able to have a majority in Congress to do this, whatever that may be, Democrat or Republican, doesn't matter. So that's, I think, what was behind this whole deal. Okay, let's leave it alone, no major changes, and then we'll deal with it in 2025.
And it's an election year, 2024, you don't want to be discussing this thing and this internal bickering. You are really running for re-election in the case of President Biden, and in the case of the Republican Party, who's going to be the winning horse. Who knows?
Who knows?
The debt ceiling package imposes new work requirements for the Supplemental Nutritional Program, also known as SNAP. There's an expectation that Puerto Rico transitions from the Nutrition Assistance Program, known as PAN, to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, this year, which would bring around an additional $1.2 billion to the island. What is your opinion on what is going to happen regarding this transition? Do you believe the transition from PAN to SNAP will have to wait? Mr. Mudd, go ahead.
It could. Why? Because when you're dealing with Congress, especially after the last Supreme Court decision, in which basically Congress can do with Puerto Rico whatever it wants, and the fact that the Democratic administration of Biden doesn't really care about us at all, except for the voters in New York and Florida. Aside from that, they don't care. There may be changes. The board, interestingly, has been pushing the government of Puerto Rico for greater work requirements of SNAP or PAN recipients. And nothing has really moved. So maybe this time it will move, but we don't know.
Well, I don't want to be contrarian, but truly, if only Puerto Rico would adopt a strategy of thanks but no thanks in terms of federal funds, I think we would start really rebuilding this island and working again with good ethics, because every time more money is given to all this population, it just makes them more dependent. So why really make an effort in terms of work or in terms of education if I'm going to be given a handout. So in terms of the work requirements, I fully agree. I mean, there are lots of people here, generations here in Puerto Rico have been receiving food stamp program. So now all these requirements, and by the way, they are not really as widespread as the Republicans wanted. They were curtailed essentially within these negotiations with President Biden. So overall, it's not that big of a deal. But in terms of Puerto Rico, I think it's high time that Puerto Rico started using more of its efforts, rebuilding its own island with its own efforts, as we did back in the 1960s with the help of the US. But it was based on work and education. Now it's based on a strategy of an extended hand on federal funds, and dependency just makes people more poor.
I agree with you entirely, but we have to look at it from the historical perspective. In 1934, when Muñoz Marín, through his backside or back door contacts with the President of the United States, Ruby Black and Eleanor Roosevelt, he started getting more money for Puerto Rico in terms of the New Deal. That's when we started this whole thing of dependency. So it's ancient, and it helped Muñoz Marín become the governor of Puerto Rico. So in that sense, what we have seen historically and we see nowadays is that the more money you bring in, the more the politicians, the same idiots who got us where we are elected. So it's like, I agree with you entirely, but it's not going to change.
We have to overturn these politicians and this vision, which is just keeping us, down and keeping us very poor. I mean, this is an indictment on economic development on the island.
What economic development?
Well, we used to, back in the 1960s. Remember, Puerto Rico was the slum of the Caribbean. It was the poorhouse of the Caribbean. Yeah. And yet, we became this star, this shining star in the Caribbean.
Because they thought that they had a strategy, but what they had was what I call in good English, prebendas of Congress. Everybody in the 60s.
Yeah.
We had the petrochemical companies. Everybody forgets Corco.
Yeah.
Corco was the biggest employer there was. I mean, huge. That's why all the electricity generation plants are in the south, because the petrochemicals were in the south. Guess what? The reason they were in Puerto Rico, for the most part, was because in the 50s, the United States thought that they were going to run out of oil. So they put a tax on imported oil. But there was a loophole. The Department of Interior had a regulation that Puerto Rico did not have to pay that because of PREPA buying oil from Venezuela. Okay? When the oil embargo came in, they repealed that law. So therefore, there was no issue. There was no competitive advantage for petrochemicals in 1980. Corco went to bankruptcy, and if you go to around Guayanilla, you see the remnants
skeletons,
of that place.
Yes.
And that's the problem. We've had economic growth based on prebendas or laws from Congress, not from things that we have here. The great advantage that Puerto Rico has is its climate, and nice people, etc. But for some reason, many governments have not been promoting tourism as it should, which should be our driving force.
Wow. Not necessarily,
True.
Tourism, it's part of the economic activity, but so does the entire Caribbean. And there are islands there that 100% depend on tourism. We don't want to be just this tourist center, 100% dependent on tourism. I want the island to be really, as it has been, even with all the incentives and all that stuff, manufacturing. That's hard production. And Puerto Rico, its competitive advantage should be its people, should be well educated, and we should be able to compete, not just for the island, workplaces, the entire globe, but if we do not have people who are really educated and who are not thinking, we have a problem. And that, I think, it's the terrible thing in Puerto Rico.
I agree with you entirely that education is the most important part.
Yeah.
But I'm going to mention 3 things. AI, deep learning,
AI.
robotics, and then there's another one that I'm missing it. All that you mention that to a politician, or even to Cedar, who's supposed to know a little bit about this,
Oh.
and they go like, oh, because they have no idea what we're talking about. And it has nothing to do with technically manufacturing, because it's learning. It is thought. You can do it in a computer, and you can generate enormous amounts of income through those ideas, because manufacturing you could put it in another place, because AI, you're not necessarily going to manufacture with it. It could be an algorithm, or it could be something else.
But robotics, as you mentioned, they will replace many of these humans. What are we going to do? Dehumanizing
Well,
the entire
depends on who you talk to.
population?
You can talk to Martin Ford. You can talk to this guy George. I think his name is.
Uh-huh.
He was in MIT and now is in Stanford. And they say yes, there will be people whose work will be substituted.
Placed, yeah.
But there will also be other jobs that will be created. The problem is, what do we do with the ones that, let's say,
Their skills are not there.
they're in their 50s,
Yeah.
they're still productive,
Yeah.
but their skills are not there, as you said.
Yeah.
So what do you do with them?
Yeah.
Talk to a politician, see what they say about it. They'll go like, federal funds.
No,
That's what they're going to say.
Yeah, I know, but that cannot be the strategy. It cannot continue to be the strategy. We
don't-
really have to go back to Operation Bootstrap. Really do, what can we do here
Haiti.
without federal funds?
I don't agree with that, but at least that's a strategy.
Yeah.
At least it is. But
And
do you
aggressive.
think the politicians have a strategy?
Well,
Oh, please, of course not.
But the first thing I would do is legislators no longer, full-time legislators, no.
I agree
You
with
go
that
and
entirely.
work and you come here only to approve the budget, maybe once or twice a year.
And nowadays,
There are
with the board
states that
around,
do that.
They don't even have to deal with the budget.
It's the promesa. That's
Promesa
it.
deals with it. The board decides,
Yeah.
this is the budget. You agree? Oh, you don't agree? Okay, don't worry. That's it.
A lot to unfold here.
Ms. Calero, in your opinion, what other federally funded welfare programs do you understand are significant and could be affected by this deal?
Well, all of this Reconstruction funds that Puerto Rico, that Congress has allocated or has approved, and yet they are trickling through, because of the federal bureaucracy, because of President Trump, as well as compiled or complicated by Puerto Rico's bureaucracy and incompetence in the use of these funds. So they could be endangered because there's going to be, if there is a change in the presidency of the United States, there definitely could be a change in terms of, you're not using these funds. Let's use them, let's channel them to Guam that just had a typhoon. Let's just pick up those funds. And so I see that maybe those Reconstruction funds, if not used properly and rapidly, because construction costs continue to increase, they're going to be a problem. Housing continues to be a real problem in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, after the earthquakes. Really, there are people who are just with blue tarps still. And this middle class is not able then to be able to pay more because new construction of housing is slow, as well as now interest rates are higher. So it is a complicated picture that we have. But definitely, if we can really accelerate the use of these funds, Reconstruction funds, especially targeted to infrastructure. And by that, it's not only hospitals, it's also the electricity network that we have here that is also another horror story.
Thank you, Ms. Calero. Mr. Martin, go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to use
diverse.
part of what she says because it's a very important point. In this deal, $30 billion of COVID funds that had not been used are being taken back and could be used for something else. And she has a very valid point. Second of all, you know where Palau is? I have no idea.
No.
No, most people don't know where it is.
Yeah.
In the South China Sea.
Ah, yeah, the island, yeah.
It's a part of the United States. It's
Territory?
It's
No?
a territory, and it's not a territory. It's a self-governing country that has a treaty with the United States, sort
Okay.
of what some of the groups of people in Puerto Rico want to do, right? They were negotiating how much money they were going to get. They got double what they wanted. Why did they get double what they wanted? Because they're in the South China Sea, which is the big place where there may be a huge,
China.
huge conflict. Third point. We haven't talked about the use of the funds. The funds that we've been assigned and funds we will be assigned in the future are less valuable because we have high inflation. And although it's going down, it hasn't gone down that much. So we're still going to be, let's say, instead of having 100%, we're going to get 90% because of inflation or less than that. So that's another factor that we have to look at. Everything is more expensive. Labor has become extremely expensive, and somebody has to put a tack or a nail and swing a hammer to construct things.
Thank you, Mr. Moon. This approved legislation will terminate roughly $28 billion in unobligated funds from the COVID-19 relief packages. However, economist Juan Lara said to the News Journal that according to the fiscal plan for the 2024 fiscal year that begins in July, that the board is assuming that $3.2 billion will enter in COVID funds, and for the following fiscal year, 2025, which begins in July of the next year, they're assuming that another $2.5 billion will come in. If we add those two together, we're talking about almost $6 billion that the board has in the fiscal plan. And now they're going to have to review it. And this takes us to our last question. What do you think is going to happen with those funds if this is accurate? Mr. Mudd?
If I could predict the future, I'll be looking for the Powerball numbers. That's joking aside. That gives you an idea of what the problem is with the fiscal plans. They're there, and they're written in stone until the board changes it, and even reality won't change the plan, but reality will change everything. We will see in 1 or 2 years what actually will happen, because we don't really know. And maybe, as we know, they may claw back those funds and then give us a little bit from here and a little bit from there, or they won't give us anything. It's not going to be pretty. That much is we know.
Well, the fiscal board has not been exactly a star in terms of its forecast. So far, their economic growth forecasting, and in real terms, they're using even the consumer price index, which is absolutely absurd to do that in terms of real economic activity. So their forecasting skills are really, I would say, between a D and an F. So if they're forecasting that these federal funds will stay in Puerto Rico, well, reality will catch up. I certainly would think that that Puerto Rico should take more of a hold in terms of, hey, we used to have a Puerto Rico planning board that would provide the economic forecast necessary in this process, budgetary process. Then there would be somebody from Treasury who would be making the forecast of revenues. And then once we knew the revenue forecast, then the budget would be prepared with all these agencies making presentations. But right now, Hacienda, Treasury keeps saying, oh, we have overdone. I mean, we surpassed our forecast. So why is the supervisory board so concerned if they are seeing so much money that is coming into Treasury? It's just these irreconcilable conflicts that to some extent we are really at a loss. And we don't have local politicians here, be it in the executive branch and least of all in the legislative branch, that really can question all these black boxes that the supervisory board has. And by the way, it's us, Puerto Rican taxpayers, who are paying their budget $60 million, and I can't see even one of their economic models to see what their black box is. It's shameful. But hey, that is what Congress mandated for Puerto Rico. And I haven't seen in this U.S. debt limit discussion that they would also be considering a supervisory board for the U.S. because the public debt of the U.S. is payable. I mean, 31 trillion and increasing. The only thing that really is the saving grace of this, take your US dollar and it says, in God we trust. Trust. As long as people trust the US economy, fine. As soon as they don't trust that, either they're going to buy public debt of China or of Russia or the Pacific Basin or even of Maduro, if that were the case. But so far, the US is still a strong economy given the neighbors that we have.
Just imagine that there was a shooting war between China and Taiwan. There's a little part close by that's called the Strait of Malacca. 61% of all oil
Go through.
No. 61% of all oil is transported via the sea. 1/3 of that goes through that little strait, which actually is only one at the narrowest. The margin is 1.1 mile. You know how easy it is to just torpedo those ships. And what happens to the price of oil if that happens? Twice, 3 times what it is right now. What will happen to Breva? What will happen to the parts that we get from Japan for our cars? What happens to the parts of cars that we get from Korea? What happens to the price of rice? Not that we get our rice from those areas, but once there's a problem there, the price of rice in California and Arkansas, et cetera, will rise. Just think about it.
Thank God he doesn't forecast. Thank God. Black cloud I have here. Black cloud.
Murphy was an optimist compared to me. So just think about that. And what would be the repercussion in Puerto Rico? Just ask a politician one day.
Yeah.
And they'll go like, huh?
They'll say, oh, renewable energy is the savior.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
Thank you to our panelists for being here with us in our discussion panel today. For more information about this topic, visit theweeklyjournal.com. And don't forget to follow us on social media to keep up to date with this and other economy stories. Have a good weekend.